Hello listeners. In this video we are going to talk about collaboration and partnerships for change. I am Dr. Imran Amin and I work with Ambedkar University, Delhi.
Hello listeners, I'm Dr. Nivedita Narayan. I'm Chief Executive Officer at the Charities Aid Foundation. A lot of my life and work has gone into collaborations and partnerships of various kinds for change, bulk of which is with Pradhan, an NGO which works across India in rural development. I'm happy to be here.
So in this video, we would explain you what are the concepts underlying partnership and collaboration and the importance they have for the social development sector. We will identify different approaches used in partnership and collaboration for development, delineate the stages and processes of collaborative work, and develop capacity building plans for and between stakeholders as they work together closely for community change and development.
Listeners, we have Imran and me here together. I'm from the NGO sector, Imran is from the academic space, and we too are collaborating and trying to demonstrate here how a partnership works. So what will we cover here in this video? We'll cover 7 things. 1, we'll introduce you to collaboration and partnerships. 2, we'll provide a simple conceptual framework for collaboration. 3, we'll highlight 6 aspects for collaborative governance. 4, the factors behind the rise of collaborative action. 5, we'll talk about design principles. 6, we'll talk about approaches. And 7, we'll talk about the actors and the arrangements.
Now, when we speak of collaboration, it has come about in the way we think about development and social change, because in a globalized world, there is a necessity to understand and bring about a systems approach or looking at the bigger picture of any social issues. This involves working with several stakeholders across various systems. The need to understand how these multiple actors interact and influence with each other and the web of interrelations through which they operate increases the complexity of the problem, but also holds the solution for and the path to desired change. Collaboration and partnership between stakeholders involves such a rethinking about how change happens and strengthening the capacities for such change. Partnership is the label used to refer to the state of being of a relationship. It is legally specified joint rights and responsibilities. On the other hand, collaboration means to co-labor or work together and is the active form of working together where participants collect resources and translate them into effective practice.
So we speak of collaboration and partnership in this video in terms of collaboration, and we look at it in 2 ways. One is inter-individual, inter-organization, inter-group, which denotes a greater degree of integration between the components, the individuals, organizations and groups, and we look at it as multi-individual, multi-organization or multi-group, where participants work together while maintaining their distinctive identities.
When speaking of the conceptual frame of collaboration, collaborative governance is an umbrella term for cross-boundary, multi-institutional arrangements to adapt and innovate responses. Collective decision-making process is formal, consensus-oriented and deliberative. So Nivedita, what are the core variables of a contingent model of collaborative governance?
Well, contingent in the sense, dear listeners, what are the various variables? Let's look at 3 things first. The starting conditions, consider the institutional design and consider leadership. What are the starting conditions? What is the level of trust? What are the conflicts? Are there any resources or liabilities during the collaboration? I would like you to remember the discussion on social capital in block 2. So what is the social capital or the group that is involved? There's also the institutional design that you have to take into consideration. What are the basic ground rules under which the collaboration takes place? What are the expectations? What are the norms? What are the kind of cultural settings in which we operate? And the third I'd like to point out here currently, Imran, is leadership. Leadership, dear friends, is very important because it mediates and facilitates between the various actors and the various individuals, groups and organizations involved in the collaboration. What else could there be, Imran? Are there any other factors?
Well, when we are looking at other factors, there are 6 aspects to the conceptual framework of collaborative governance that we are talking about. It begins with, first, that it involves a new form of collective action with broad societal implications. At the same time, it secondly has a very bottom-up characteristics of stakeholders developing highly practical, local, solution-oriented agendas. At the same time, when we are thinking of collaborative governance, we have to understand that it operates in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment, which requires adaptive leadership, flexible governance, and fluid boundaries. Now, Nivedita, could you elaborate on the next 3?
There are 3 more conceptual aspects we need to look at as we're thinking about collaboration. Let's talk. The first is about everybody who's affected or interested in the issue. They need to be there and represented for problem solving together. The 5th one in our 6 aspects is change and adapt to address these issues. Each stakeholder, each actor has to change in order to deal with this. It's not enough for anyone to do so. And finally, learning and knowledge. Cross-sector learning and knowledge for social innovation and change is central to it. Each actor, each stakeholder has to learn and the collaborative group needs to learn together. I think we can leave it at these 6, right, Imran?
Yeah, I think these 6 will give you a general sense of how we are going about organizing collaborative actions. Now, coming to the factors that have led to the rise of collaborative action as being one of the fundamental ways in which we think of social change today, we highlight a set of factors that have been responsible for bringing this about. The first among these is the series of crises, the financial crisis that keeps on happening again and again, the environmental crisis and those of climate change that we face on an everyday basis, as well as social crises of hunger and starvation, accompanying things like obesity and lifestyle problems, social inequalities, are the kinds of crises that have led to bringing various actors involved in any social change to come together and work on such issues. At the same time, when we are looking at ways in which previous implementation processes that had focused on state-led approach or a market-led approach, that dichotomy had led to several failures and crises that we had mentioned earlier. What else can you think of, Nivedita, when you speak or think of the factors behind the rise of collaborative governance?
Well, Imran and dear listeners and dear Imran, I think that the factors behind the rise of this approach of collaboration are very important because for 2 reasons. Number 1, it tells us why collaboration is important. Number 2, as you will see in the next 3 that I'm going to talk about, there is no going back. Collaboration is a requirement. If you don't collaborate, you die. Let's look at these 3. Number 1, unless we recognize and legitimize local knowledge, we will be stuck with expertise as the exclusive focus and the authority of experts. It cannot be questioned. This leads to very partial realities and very partial solutions to very complex problems. Again, wicked problems or complex problems are characterized by incomplete or contradictory information, and changing contexts and complexity is rising. We have discussed this in earlier videos. I myself have discussed this in Communication for Development and in the video in block 1 on groups. This is another reason for the rise of collaboration as a solution, as a way, as a mechanism to deal with complexity. And finally, as we involve multiple stakeholders at multiple levels with a vast diversity in understanding of what the problems are and what the solutions are, from local to global, we can actually address the issues that otherwise were just endemic, chronic, and were not changing, like malnutrition, issues related to hunger, issues related to social change, gender violence, production systems that bring the poorer in, the smallholders in. It involves multiple stakeholders. So what do you think, Imran, we should do about this? How do we go about it?
When we are trying to go about encountering or dealing with these factors that we just discussed, Nivedita, I think we need to have some clarity about how do we design a collaborative process. What is it that we need to do if we want to empower, enlighten, and engage communities in bringing about such a collaborative arrangement for social change in practice? Now, in this, I think the first step of the 8 that we are going to enumerate here has to be to recognize, enable, and encourage ordinary people that these change makers are going to work with to be able to map and mobilize their own assets and become effective producers of social change rather than merely recipients of social change. They should be able to anchor this process of social change. Now, what do you think should be the next principle?
So, Imran, you laid out one of the 8. I'm going to lay down 3 more and let's see where it goes. The second principle, design principle, is about professional expertise. How can we make professional expertise a shared resource that empowers people and enriches their local knowledge and promotes robust deliberation? This, dear listeners, has been discussed in each and every video on how professional expertise, scientific knowledge, and local knowledge can come into dialogue, and you already know about it. A third principle is related to power, which again we have been discussing from video 1 onwards. How do we reconceptualize or reimagine power in terms of collaboration rather than control, where boundaries of interest, identity, and various organizations and institutions, individuals come together and acknowledge the power differences, and then we actively address this. We have already studied this, dear listeners, in our first block and second block very specifically. A fourth principle, design principle, is about organizational culture. How do we acknowledge people as partners, the communities who are ultimately to benefit from this, the children who have to eat better, the mothers who have to cook differently, the parents who have to earn better? How are they partners rather than simply users or clients to be served information or change with? How do we build autonomy within these systems and accountability of the stakeholder system to the change process and to those who have to be ultimately served? How about the others, Imran? Out of the 8, we've covered 4. Please, could you tell us the other 4?
Like you were mentioning, that power becomes a fundamental thing. At the same time, it's the imbalances of power and resources that needs to be accounted for and addressed in these endeavors. At the same time, when we come to the 6th factor, leadership becomes critical in upholding open and inclusive, at the same time transparent ways in which the collaborative process progresses. And in all these, the effort has to be to build a cycle of communication, trust, commitment, understanding, and outcome with a robust feedback mechanism that strengthens the collaborative cycle. All these is a long-term process, and therefore, as a final design principle, we need to have small and concrete but tangible goals that can build momentum to and feedback into the trust building endeavors that we were speaking about. Now, having outlined these ways in which we can design a collaborative effort, Vedita, what do you think should be the approaches of collaboration?
Thanks, Imran. So we have the principles, the design principles. This tells us these are the 8 things we have to keep in mind when we are designing a collaboration and working with a collaboration or in a collaborative way. But there are also approaches to collaboration, and these 8 principles, design principles, can be applied to these approaches. What is an approach? An approach is the basic philosophical or the way in which we are going to collaborate. It could be, for example, directive. It could be hierarchical, like this, where there's vertical control, there's communication and learning, where the chain of command is clear and power is dealt with in a particular way. A second is elective. Elective says that each partner works autonomously, and each partner works in what we say a silo. They have distinct roles and they have brief and informational communication. They tell each other what they are doing, but each partner works independently. A third is an integrative philosophy, in which case understanding amongst all the stakeholders or partners is built through negotiation, through communication, where roles are distinct but the boundaries are not so rigid. Boundaries, as we discussed in the earlier video, you might remember, dear listeners, when we were talking about the conceptual tools of systems in the video related to behavior change communication, a systems approach. In the integrative approach, there is also an acceptance of learning from all involved partners. This may apply in others too, but there may be less learning across partners happening in 1 and 2. What are the other things that we need to think of, Imran, as we talk about collaboration?
When we're talking about collaboration, Nivedita, I think one of the important factors that we need to keep in mind is that the actors involved in collaborative process across these multiple levels have also changed. Not only have the earlier actors evolved and become a different form, there are new actors that are emerging. Now, to explain the earlier actors and how they have changed, I would like to mention how profit organizations that used to be driven by profit motive have now evolved to undertake research and development for social innovation. At the same time, they are undertaking CSR initiatives and philanthropy measures to bring about social change. Similarly, NGOs or non-governmental organizations have evolved from being advocates of a particular policy to being active partners of social change, where they experiment and pilot new approaches, they expand the scope of development work and facilitate cross-sector partnership between corporate organizations and governmental actors. Similarly, government programs and departments that used to work in silo just within themselves now have collaborative arrangements with corporate houses and NGOs to implement at the bottom level. Which other actors can you think of, Nivedita, that are working in this sector?
Well, in addition to the 3 you highlighted, let's add another 3. Let's start with universities and research institutions, like your university. It undertakes action for social change through action research and participatory action research projects. In our collaborative, for this particular IGNOU course, we know that University of East Anglia, we see the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences are part of the collaboration. So ours is an example of collaboration for social change with universities and research institutions. It also involves philanthropic organizations, donor organizations who have an active role in innovating and giving grants and charitable funds for social change. Many donor organizations are involved in actually investing in local communities and helping change to happen. A new form is social entrepreneurship, the last that I'd like to highlight, and social finance or impact investors. These are people with entrepreneurial orientation, but they are also looking to build work for social purpose, not only for private benefit. And this is the last category. So we now have 6 kinds of actors. Yes. At least let's think about those, dear listeners, when we're looking out for collaboration.
Now, having outlined these actors that are involved, we now come to the kind of arrangements we can have when we speak of collaboration. And here there are a set of things that we would like to highlight when we are talking about how do we bring about a collaborative arrangement. To begin with, collaboration involves a certain kind of structure and attitude. This will involve there being equality between partners, participants being able to share values of flexibility, openness, and adaptability, the stakeholders recognizing and accepting the need to collaborate. They not only have to understand that yes, to be able to bring about social change in the current context, we need to collaborate, as well as accept that we have to collaborate by engaging in trust building processes. At the same time, they need to have commitment to and co-own the collaborative process. Now, these are the aspects that we keep in mind when we are talking about structures and attitudes. However, the most fundamental part of a collaborative arrangement has to be communication. Now, when we speak of communication, there has to be face-to-face, dense communication happening through regular meetings and discussions between stakeholders so that they are able to build a shared understanding through effective information sharing. What else do you think, Nivedita, would be of concern when we are talking of collaborative arrangements?
Well, in addition to the 2 that you have already laid out, I'm going to lay out 4 more. However, before I do that, I'd like the listeners to go back. I'd like you to think about the examples that have been shared in all the earlier videos and try to relate it with this. Examples of how women have come together through intense communication and discussion for collective action. Examples of how they collaborate with various government officers and offices in agriculture production clusters, how they collaborate with market actors. Examples of how the young filmmakers in the videos on communication collaborated with communities, with other organizations like NGOs and the local Anganwadi and Asha workers in order to improve knowledge, attitudes and practices. So there are various kinds of collaborative arrangements. You have already discussed, dear listeners. Please go back to those and think about these next 4 that we are laying out. Number 1, the conditions. What are the conditions under which collaboration can work? We have already talked about it, but let's talk about purpose and also shared aims and objectives. Those are key, as we've discussed earlier. In addition, if there are histories of conflict and collaboration between stakeholders, those make a difference to the collaboration. For example, if the government and an NGO have a relationship where they do not see eye to eye, the collaboration doesn't work. However, where they do see eye to eye and they agree, the collaboration proceeds, as in the agriculture production clusters that we have seen. Learning, we keep repeating learning, it's a condition, it's a design principle, it falls in every category. So learning is another one. The capacity to reflect, to monitor, to measure, to recognize unpredictability is very important. The next is the scope and stimulus for innovation. Flexibility, flexible strategy, encouragement for creativity, and a space that encourages transformation. Finally, as discussed in block 1, group processes. Group processes are central condition for change. Confidence in sharing roles, commitment to the group, dealing with power and resource imbalances, and understanding roles and responsibilities of individuals and groups of groups. Dear learners, please relate these. And now Imran is going to share an exercise with you.
Like Nivedita was mentioning, we have had a whole set of examples across the different chapters, across the different videos, on different kinds and ways of people coming together and working in collaboration. I would ask the listeners to go back, have a look at this, and see which one of them represents the most interesting case study for each of you of collaborative actions.
I'd like to just say a last line here, that my video on collective action in the sustainable livelihoods section and on group processes in block 1 relate to this, because block 1 is about individuals collaborating in groups, block 2 is about groups collaborating for sustainable collective action, and in this one, dear listeners, we have organizations and stakeholders collaborating, and that is called collaborative action. So group action, collective action and collaborative action can help us in a stream to work across the change process. Thank you everybody, and we now will also like to show you the references, and now our final slide, which is going to be about the partners. Thank you, and thank you Imran.
Thank you, Nivedita.